Hello, my name is Kanika Talwar, and I was a gifted and talented mentee for Forpin ISD this year. And this is my project assessing the information sources most widely accessed during public crises, as well as the motivations behind it. And I was lucky enough to be able to intern at Creative Consumer Research, which is a company that focuses on market research, how companies' products can be improved, as well as studying consumer data for their clients, which are different businesses. And I first would like to thank my GT mentorship leader, Miss Nancy Bryant, for all of her help throughout the school year, as well as my mentor at Creative Consumer Research, Miss Patricia Pratt, and also Mr. Ryder Pratt, who really helped me in the creation of this project and learning more about the subject that I was studying, which was market research and marketing in general. So the reason I chose this topic was because I felt that it was very relevant, especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic, because I was interested in how the spread of data affects different people and different demographics during public disasters, how they are able to access information. And through my internship, I had a lot of professional business reading materials that taught me really how valuable gathering new information about consumer technology usages in order to see how to target specific audiences and demographics for products. And some of the more extreme software that I learned about was this new technology being developed in order to track users' habits while browsing, such as with eye movements and time spent on an advertisement. So all that really made me more interested in researching about this. And for example, in the book American Decades 2000 to 2009, I learned about how media outlets through technology and just different kinds of information sources really changed throughout the 21st century to fit the needs of the population. So just to give an overview or an abstract of my project, what I was trying to investigate was to practice my investigation skills and understand how to put this kind of project together. The main thing I was trying to look at were the kinds of information sources that people, specifically in the greater Houston metropolitan area, utilize in order to gather data during crises, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic and Hurricane Harvey. It was also trying to assess users' awareness of the information sources that were not just digital, there were also newspapers, things like that. And it was obviously it was structured in order to get a representative sample of the demographics of Greater Houston, which is very diverse. So another reason why this project is felt especially important was because with so many different media outlets and sources out there, it's important to recognize that not all of them are the same or have the same amount of credibility or are as convenient to use for everybody. So I'll get into my own theory in a little bit, but it wasn't just about the specific answers that I received, but I was also looking for patterns in the people who gave certain answers, such as with ethnicity, age, and their own motivations for using the information sources that they did, because I really wanted to see how city and governmental leaders could know where to divert attention and how companies can target specific audiences, things like that. The list is endless for how this information can be used. We will explore the methodology and conclusions in just a little bit as the project proceeds, but these were the main topics that I was trying to cover. The research statement that I was trying to explore was, first of all, my theory, which was that most of the people, no matter what the ethnic group was in Houston, would utilize television and social media the most to gather their information simply because of human behaviors and, of course, convenience. And also because I thought that specifically convenience would be given more importance rather than accuracy. And so, as what people value when they want to gather data about crises. And also, I was thinking that older people would use a lower variety of resources and stick to the things that they know, which are not always as digital or not on social media. So that the overview of my project is obviously the theory as well as the relevance of this information in trying to see how different ethnic groups and ages, which devices they own, which sources they look to access first, so that different organizations can find these specific groups to target for assistance as well as for advertisements and other information to give them. So my primary objective for this project was to conduct phone interviews with people living in Houston in order to see which data sources they used and why they did during COVID-19 and Hurricane Harvey. Some secondary objectives that were to assist the accuracy of the project were to see the users' awareness of these sources for the crises, as well as to obtain a demographic profile that was accurate in reflecting Houston's population, and to provide unbiased results. And something that was also important was that how this can be used to predict future usage of these sources during crises. The methodology for this project was for my internship company, Creative Consumer Research, to conduct these interviews with people through phone calls during a 4-day period, and all of them were residents of Houston. So these were some of the survey questions of the survey that I put together that were asked of this random sample of people. So first, we had to make sure that there were quotas put in place in order to create a reflective sample for the population. And as well as for ethnicity, as you can see, the percentages kind of reflect the diversity of Houston as close as possible with the resources at hand with the 100 people surveyed. And something important was that all the subjects that were taken for the interview and continued with the interview whose data was used, none of them could have immediate family or could themselves work for a governmental agency or a media company, a market research company, or an advertising agency to make sure that none of them had different behaviors based on their, prior knowledge of these kinds of surveys. This is a continuation of the survey questions just to find patterns based on education and income level. As you can see, these were the different income levels chosen and the different education levels that people were categorizing themselves into, and both of them formed a bell curve when we were taking the data later on. And then these were the questions that were more to reflect the actual motivations behind the survey. So for these questions, people thought about their activities during the last 6 to 7 weeks during the quarantine time for coronavirus. The first question was about which devices they owned. Second one was about which devices they used the most. This was just to gain a general idea of what people relied on the most. And obviously the main answers were smartphone and their computer for working people in the technological fields. So these questions were more important. They were asked twice. Once was for the COVID-19 crisis, and once was for Hurricane Harvey. And they were kind of to see which information sources people obtained information for during these separate crises, which was really the main aspect of what we were trying to get into. The fourth question was what information source the person used the most to obtain information. And so these were the answer choices that were used for both of them. As you can see, a lot of them were based on news. So the first one was news from television, news from websites, news from online journals, but also from things that were not technological, such as newspapers that were paper and journals. And so also to focus on people that were looking directly to organizations to get their information, we added CDC, NIH, and WHO, as well as Red Cross, United Way, just to see if people went to these direct organizations to get their data if they were looking for an accurate portrayal. And then finally, insurance companies and social media rounded out. And then this question was also asked twice, once for coronavirus and once for Hurricane Harvey, which was what would you say is or was more important when obtaining information during and for this crisis? This was very important because we wanted to test not only information sources, but motivations specific people had. So the two answer choices were convenience or credibility and accuracy of information retrieved. And this is really important with so much fake news and misleading information out and about, and different people are hearing different things. And so you can really tell what a person values more. Things of devices that were used. So all the people that were surveyed had a smartphone for information using the most out of their devices, which was not surprising. And the majority of Caucasians, as well as the majority of Asians, used 3 to 4 devices, which were the highest percentages, and this was the highest number of devices used. So for some of the people who were Hispanic or Latinx, they preferred to do the interview in Spanish. So for the majority of these people doing the interview in Spanish, a smartphone was the only device used. But for all of the other ethnicities, the distributions were overall normal. Most people used 3 to 4 devices, and then some used 2 and some used 1. findings for different information sources that were used. Of course, television and social media were by far the most widely used. But what was interesting was that during the coronavirus period, 75% of the people used social media as a source, but during Harvey, a lot less people did. It was only about 40%, which kind of shows that social media is definitely improving a lot in not only access, but also accuracy, as you will later see. And the usage is just increasing a lot. Almost everybody used television in both of the crises. So while television has stayed mostly consistent, social media has gone up a lot in usage. And then also during coronavirus, more people were using newspapers, websites, and an overall greater number of sources than during Harvey, which kind of shows, I guess, that more people are more afraid. So they're looking for more reliable information by going directly to these websites and professional published newspapers. And then out of all of the organizations that were accessed, CDC was definitely the most widely accessed out of these health organizations. And so for ethnicities, Caucasian people were the ones who used the most variety of information sources as well as number of devices, which probably shows that historically they've had more access to them. And so they also had the greatest percent of people that were reaching the highest education levels. So obviously you can see the correlation there and where assistance needs to be given to people who haven't had these advantages early on in life. And then also the people who did the Hispanic or Latinx people who did the interview in English, they tended to use CDC, WHO, and Red Cross more than the other ethnic groups, which was interesting, and that was not something that was hypothesized. So this is just a graph to show the information source data, just to see the different distributions. And obviously you can see the highlights of television and social media, and then the difference between social media throughout the crises, and then how CDC was used much more than any of the other medical websites. So moving on to findings for the motivations behind usages based on credibility or convenience. So for coronavirus, actually 100% of Caucasian people picked credibility, and most of the people in other ethnic groups also did credibility. But what was interesting was that a lot of people chose credibility for coronavirus when these exact same people had chosen convenience for Hurricane Harvey. And so probably this could be because during the quarantine of COVID-19, people have more time, and also people are more afraid that the virus will kill them out of individually, rather than with Hurricane Harvey, only some people were severely affected, even in Houston itself. So this would affect all socioeconomic groups currently. And then also in Harvey, the shelters and places that people were staying were very chaotic. So they probably didn't have access to they probably didn't have easily accessible data. So this is just a graph of the data for motivations. So as you can see, credibility was a much bigger factor than convenience for both crises, but also credibility was more important during COVID-19 than Harvey for the reasons given previously, as you know, the assumptions that I'm making. So going on to the conclusions and how all of this ties together for further research. So the hypothesis was supported in that most people in Houston use television and social media for this information, but not supported in that people thought that accuracy was more important than convenience. This could be biased by personal opinion of what people value over what they really looked for, but it was still insightful to what people place value on and what they would be more attracted to. So social media, what I assumed, could have increased in usage because its news information appears more accurate rather than appearing easier to access, which is important for people to take into account. And also, I believe that future research should be done on why the CDC specifically had so many more users. And also, some of the recommendations I had from this research was that, and also that Houston city leaders and Mayor Turner should ensure that people are equally informed, such as seeing how investigating what draws mostly English speaking Hispanic and Latinx people to CDC, WHO, and Red Cross, and focusing on that, bringing in resources to target groups, as well as creating multilingual platforms for people on TV channels and social media. So, endless research can be done on this topic, but for my project, I really learned a lot about how to create this kind of survey and how to send it out to the people that I was trying to focus on. And this was a citation that I used. Thank you so much for listening to my project.